Oceans away from the castle that she found herself imprisoned in, the last empress of Mexico's husband was shot dead by firing squad. Pushed up against a wall by Mexican Republicans, Maximilian I of Mexico was overheard uttering his final words as dawn broke on the 19th of June 1867. "May my blood, which is about to be spilled, end the bloodshed which has been experienced in my new motherland." Maximilian and Carlotta had arrived in Mexico City just 3 years earlier, having accepted Napoleon III's proposal that the couple become the sovereigns of a new Mexico, one that had only become independent from the Spanish Empire 40 years prior. The rift between the conservative and liberal factions in Mexico had reached a boiling point in the middle of the century, and the conservative monarchists, desperate to reclaim power after their loss in the 3-year civil war, paved the way for French intervention and the eventual establishment of the French emperor's puppet regime. In hindsight, the collapse of the Second Mexican Empire may seem inevitable, but when SMS Navarra docked at Veracruz on the 29th of May 1864, the disembarking Maximilian and Carlotta could never have anticipated the grim fates that awaited them both. Here are the lives of Maximilian and Carlotta of Mexico, and this is Crown Undone. It only took one meeting before Leopold, the first king of the Belgians, advised the visiting Habsburg prince to propose to his only daughter, Charlotte. Maximilian had been born on the 6th of July, 1832, during the reign of his grandfather, the last Holy Roman Emperor and the first Emperor of Austria, Francis I. His father, Archduke Franz Karl, and his mother, Princess Sophie of Bavaria, had already given birth to their first son, Franz Joseph, who would eventually succeed the Austrian throne at one of its most calamitous moments in history. Maximilian's early life and adolescence was dominated by a rigorous education. At 7, he was studying 32 hours a week, and by 17, he was spending 55 hours each week learning history, law, languages, diplomacy, and fencing. Maximilian joined the Imperial Austrian Navy, and on the 10th of September 1854, he was named Commander-in-Chief of the Austrian Navy. 2 years later, he married the Belgian princess Charlotte on the 27th of July 1857 at the Royal Palace of Brussels, the same city that Charlotte had been born in just 17 years earlier. Charlotte became the fourth and final child of King Leopold I of Belgium and his second wife, Louise of Orléans. Maximilian reportedly said of his future wife, "She's short, I'm tall, which must be. She's brunette, I'm blonde, which is good too. And she is very intelligent, which is a bit annoying, but I will undoubtedly get over it." Maximilian's short-lived appointment as the Viceroy of the Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia required the couple to relocate to Milan the same year that they were married, and though they lived a life of luxury over Maximilian's tenure, he was ordered to resign from the post just 2 years later. The reforms he wanted to introduce and his kindness shown towards Italian rebels were deemed a liability by Vienna, and he was dismissed on the 10th of April 1859. On the 3rd of October 1863, Maximilian and Charlotte awoke in their castle in Trieste to the sounds of hurried knocking. A delegation of prominent Mexican conservatives had arrived at Miramar Castle to formally offer the Habsburg Archduke the Mexican throne. Days earlier, Maximilian had said that he would accept the Mexican crown under the conditions that the Mexican people personally asked for him to rule, and that support from both France and Britain was guaranteed. After Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, the country was split between hostile liberal and conservative parties, and even though the first Emperor of Mexico had been forced into exile after only a year of rule and then was shot and killed when he attempted to return to the country, the monarchist faction of the Conservative Party continued to believe that monarchical rule was viable. Now, the monarchists wanted a European prince to sit atop a Mexican throne, and even though Maximilian had declined the same offer 4 years earlier, this time, given the international context, the option seemed promising. The Emperor of France, Napoleon III, took his chance to prop up a Latin satellite state in Mexico, in an attempt to limit the growing American influence in the region. In fact, even the term Latin America itself was thought to have been coined in the French capital a decade earlier. When a French fleet reached Mexico in 1862, supposedly docking to collect debts, some 30,000 troops disembarked, overthrew the Mexican Republic, and deposed the president Benito Juárez. Maximilian formally accepted the crown of Mexico at his Italian castle on the 10th of April 1864. The next month, Maximilian and Charlotte, having received a blessing from Pope Pius IX and watching a salute organised by Britain's Queen Victoria as they sailed past Gibraltar, arrived at Veracruz aboard SMS Novara. A yellow fever outbreak meant that the public reception for the new emperor was meagre, and even though Maximilian and Charlotte, now known as Carlotta, were officially crowned at the Mexico City Metropolitan Cathedral, the liberal forces headed by the ousted President Juarez refused to recognize their rule. From the beginning, Maximilian and Carlotta's tenure was marked by extravagance, and even though the emperor's legitimacy had originally been bolstered by Mexico's conservatives, he upheld Juarez's sweeping liberal reforms, which he had been expected to reverse. By the end of the American Civil War in 1865, though, the US redirected its attention to its southern neighbour. The US government had refused to recognise Maximilian's Mexican Empire and had ignored all of the emperor's correspondence. A private American loan valued at $30 million was approved for Juarez, and every day more and more American volunteers were joining the liberal and Republican Mexican forces. As the military situation in Mexico deteriorated, Maximilian signed a decree that authorized the court-martial and execution of anyone discovered aiding or participating in Republican guerrilla activity, and thousands of Juarez's supporters were shot dead as a result. By 1866, the French considered the conflict hopeless, and as US diplomatic pressure grew, and amid the ever-growing threat of Prussia back in Europe, Napoleon saw the cost of keeping troops stationed in Mexico as untenable. Without the adequate military means to defend his position, the emperor's fate seemed sealed. While Maximilian contemplated his abdication, Carlotta rushed back to Europe in the hopes of securing aid for her husband. The next year, Juarez's troops had pushed back into Mexico City, and Maximilian was captured on the morning of the 16th of May, 1867. The anti-monarchist liberals had the overthrown emperor charged with conspiring to overthrow the Mexican government, and just one day after the trial began, Maximilian was sentenced to death. At 6:40 in the morning on the 19th of June, Maximilian, alongside two of his generals, were executed atop the hill where the Emperor Maximilian Memorial Chapel now stands. Maximilian's embalmed body was kept in Mexico and put on display for 6 months after his death, before it was sent back to Austria aboard SMS Novara, the same ship that brought the Emperor and Empress to the country in the first place. Carlotta, on the other hand, had suffered a profound mental collapse when she realised that her husband's cause was hopeless. She had managed to organise a meeting with Napoleon's wife Eugenie at the hotel she was staying in Paris, and although she eventually arranged an audience with Napoleon III himself the next day, the meeting was a complete failure. The French emperor could not be persuaded. Intensely shaken, Carlotta began the journey back to Miramar Castle in Trieste, though her mental state continued to deteriorate. She was afraid of being pursued by assassins en route and was constantly convinced that her food was being poisoned. After a 1-month stay in Trieste, Carlotta travelled to the Vatican and desperately petitioned Pope Pius IX to help her husband. She was so distressed that she refused to sleep in her own hotel room and became the first woman to stay the night in the Vatican. It was decided by her Belgian family that Carlotta was not to be told of Maximilian's execution, and although she spent the next several months as a virtual prisoner in Miramar Castle, she was soon convinced to return to Belgium, soon fading away from the public eye altogether. Carlotta's lady-in-waiting said of the deposed empress that most of the time the unfortunate woman was absorbed in long silences, or on the contrary, in heated discussions in French, English, German, Italian, Spanish, with imaginary interlocutors, discussions too incoherent, too disjointed for one to be able to guess what thoughts preoccupied this brain. Carlotta lived through the First World War and the German invasion of Belgium, during which a sign was attached to the gates of the castle she lived in which read, "This domain, property of the Crown of Belgium, is occupied by Her Majesty the Empress of Mexico. I order the German soldiers passing by here not to ring the bell and to leave the place untouched." Carlotta died from pneumonia on the 19th of January 1927 at the age of 86, having never stepped foot in Mexico again. Those were the lives of Maximilian and Carlotta of Mexico, and this was Crown Undone.